Welcome, everyone, to this week's episode of the Bamboo Lab podcast. As always, I'm your host, your appreciative host, Brian Bosley. And for the better part of the past 26 years, I've had the most distinct pleasure and honor of working alongside and coaching and learning from some of the world's top performers. And what we do here each episode is we simply bring their ideas, their challenges, their triumphs, and their wisdom directly to you. If you ever feel like sometimes you're stuck on that hamster wheel of life and you're just spinning and spinning, but you're just not going in the right direction, well, you've landed in the right spot. The Bamboo Lab podcast is written, created, and directed and broadcast just for you, all you strivers, thrivers, and survivors out there. If you'd like to learn more about what we do here in the Bamboo Lab, please look us up. Our new website is www.bamboolab3.com. All right. Some updated on statistics as of 30 minutes ago. We are now being avidly followed and subscribed to on 6 continents, in 37 countries, and in 784 cities around this globe. And I think that number of cities is up 102 cities since, I think, 10 or 12 days ago. That's great stuff. Our average monthly downloads and subscribership is up 509% since April of this year. So, and it's all due to these amazing guests that I bring on, including especially the one we have for you today. I want to read one heart letter that came in through text last week, and this is an editor of a magazine. I won't say the magazine. I don't want to give the editor or the listener away, but she said, "Hey, Brian, I listened to your last podcast. It was phenomenal. You do a great job at this. In other news, I'm now the editor of XYZ magazine. Maybe I should do a little write-up about you." I think that's a good idea. All right, let's dissect. Today we have a gentleman on that I have known for a number of years. I've had the opportunity to work with his team at his law firm over the years and just became good friends and stayed in touch. We have Brian Plachta. Brian is an author, a spiritual director, and workshop leader. He's a Dominican associate for 25 years. Brian, he holds a master's in pastoral counseling and is a frequent teacher on just a broad variety of practical spirituality topics. He does workshops, retreats, and works conference centers and colleges. He just has a real passion, this guy does. When you listen to him, you hear the passion exude. His real passion revolves around helping men and women experience the presence of God in their daily, everyday lives. His newest book that just came out, which I am holding in my hand, is Finding Flow, Spiritual Practices to Reclaim Inner Peace, Balance, and Wholeness. It was recently published, and it's now ready for you to buy on Amazon. Great book. Brian also is an attorney, husband, and father of 4 children. He is actually one of the founding members of the Reader Plachta Murphy Law Firm located in Grand Rapids, Michigan. Without further ado, Mr. Brian Plachta, my dear friend, welcome to the Bamboo Lab podcast.
Oh, thank you, Brian. It's great to connect with you.
Now, the audience doesn't know this, but this is our second go-around at this morning.
That's true,
yeah,
exactly.
Yeah, the Bamboo Pack, we did about 10 minutes of recording. And we were just getting a bunch of glitches through the phone. So we switched up and now we're back and it's going perfectly. So, Brian, I know a lot about you, but I know my Bamboo Pack members do not. So can you please share who you are, where you come from?
Yeah, I kind of had 2 halves of my life. So the first half, born and raised here in Grand Rapids, Michigan, youngest of 4 siblings. My mom and dad, great parents, Irish, Polish, Catholics. They sent me to Catholic schools, grade school, high school. When my dad was 56, I was 16, just going into my senior year in high school. My dad developed cancer. He was a smoker. Camel non-filtered cigarettes, unfortunately, and he suffered with lung cancer, about 6 months, and then died. And I was 16, and it was like my world kind of fell apart, but I grew up really quickly because my dad was a really strong man, 6'4", 210 pounds. Very strong, but also very compassionate. And so I kind of tried to emulate his life, to follow in his footsteps. I went on to college here in Grand Rapids at Aquinas, where I met my girlfriend at that time, now my wife now for 39 years, and started dating Denise during college. But I had this inkling that I wasn't sure whether I was going to be a priest or a lawyer. And talk about a dichotomy, basically. But, and there was just this nudge inside of me. I just felt, and we'll talk about the Father Joyce is the guy that really inspired me to think about that early in my life. But I wasn't sure which way to go. I had signed up for law school, was accepted. Denise and I had a great relationship as boyfriend and girlfriend, shared the same faith, wanted to have kids. But I was honest with her. I said, I'm not sure what direction I'm going in my life. So through a good friend he suggested I meet with and have dinner with Bishop Gumbleton and in Saginaw. So I had dinner with him, and he told me something. What I learned is there's these universal truths that each one of us learns in our lives that we can apply to our own life. And he used the image of a tapestry. He says, if you look at a blanket, the front of it looks really nice and comfy, but if you turn it over, there's threads that form it. And so he says, when you want to discern where you're being called, invited in your life, look at the threads. And he said, the threads in your life are you signed up for law school, you've got this great relationship with a gal, and you're thinking about being a lawyer. He said, I would encourage you to continue down the tapestry of your life. But he also said something, I'd like you to meet with a spiritual director once a month. I went to law school at U of D, University of Detroit, and so this priest was outside of Detroit. So I wanted to meet with him. I had no idea what a spiritual director was. I thought, that's kind of weird, but I thought, well, what the heck? So went on to law school, met every month with a priest who was a spiritual director. My wife and I got married. I graduated. Came back to Grand Rapids from law school, started our family, my wife and I, and was a partner for 12 years at Smith, Hoy, Rice & Rogie here in Grand Rapids, and then started my own law firm later on. But in my early 30s, I just started to get discontented, and that's where, looking back, I realized the second part of my life was unfolding. I just had that sense that many of us have, is like, isn't there more to life than just going to work and doing the 8 to 6 and weekend job that I had and and it was fine being a lawyer, but I just felt like there was something more to life. And so I fortunately stumbled upon a book by Bob Buford called Halftime: Moving from Success to Significance. And I read that book, and it really spoke to me. He talked about that each one of us, some people call it a midlife crisis, but he says that's not true. It's when we have that discontent, or sometimes the wheels fall off the wagon of our lives. It really is an invitation to begin to retool towards the second half of life. And so it really spoke to me, okay, maybe there is a second half of life. Through a spiritual director at that time, I took a spiritual gifts inventory. There's a free one now on my website for people to use.
Can you share your website with the audience?
Sure. It's www.brianplachta.com. So Brian, Brian, and then my last name, Plachta, Plachta.com. And under the free resources tab, there's a bunch of free resources, including that spiritual gifts inventory that people can download. So I took that spiritual gifts inventory and I recognized, wow, I'm a writer, I'm a teacher, I'm an encourager, were my top 3 gifts. So I started writing. I wrote 2 books that I self-published. I started a blog back in 2016 every Monday. It's called Simple Wisdom for Everyday Living, that goes out to subscribers for free. But I also, like what Buford said, is in that first half of life, when you feel that draw to the second half, it's time you might need to get some additional education. So I continued with my law practice, but I went on and got a master's in pastoral counseling. Through the Dominican Center, I became a certified spiritual director. And I was thinking, when I turn 65, I'll start doing the second half of life. I was teaching some classes, spirituality classes, and doing spiritual direction with clients, but kind of on a part-time basis. Really, my energy was devoted to practicing law, basically. But I thought at 65, okay, that's when I'll move in the second half. Well, the old saying is, if you want to make God laugh, tell him your plans, basically. Mm-hmm. Because about 5 years ago, when I was 57, I was up at my cottage doing a men's retreat. I was facilitating a group of guys through a weekend spirituality retreat. And on Friday night, I was trying to communicate with the guys, but I knew what I wanted to say, but I couldn't get the words out. And I had no idea what was going on. So I just went to bed. I got up the next morning. It still felt kind of funky. So I drove myself to the med station, and lo and behold, I had a stroke. I had no idea. And the doctors basically said what had happened, I was at 1% of people that I'd gone to a chiropractor that earlier in that month to get an adjustment to my neck. And apparently the adjustment caused a sever in my left carotid artery. And it actually was completely blocked. There's a blood clot that formed. And the doctor said, this is medically, I write about it in my Finding Flow book, and I call it a stroke of luck. He said, medically, you should be either dead or in a wheelchair, literally unable to eat and feed yourself. But he said, what happened, he showed me the x-rays. The blood on the right side of my neck through the carotid arteries that were functioning had literally pushed through kind of like a river over my skull to the left side of my brain. And there was enough blood flowing into the left side of the brain that the only thing that was impacted was my speech. And it's funny because I called my wife and I was trying to communicate with her from the med station. She said, "Have you been day drinking?" And I'm like, "No." The nurse grabbed the phone and explained what had happened. And so I ended up going to St. Mary's Hospital. They took my ambulance to St. Mary's here in Grand Rapids for more tests and everything. And that Saturday night, I was in the hospital bed. My family had come up and everything, but it was about 1:00 in the morning, and was still waiting for a test the next day. And I had kind of this experience. Some may call it a mystical experience, where I in the hospital bed, I was very calm and comfortable and okay, but I had the sense that I was talking to God, and my mom and dad, who at that time were deceased, were there talking with me. Again, it wasn't an audible conversation, but it felt really, in my imagination, it was very real. And I asked God, I said, "Am I going to die?" And I heard kind of the response from God kind of was like, "Well, do you want to come to heaven?" And I'm like, "Well, I'm 57. Life's been good, but, wow, going to the pearly gates might be kind of nice to sit back and just enjoy life, up there in heaven." But as I pondered it with God and my parents there, I was like, well, but I'd miss my wife and my kids and future grandkids. So I said, no, I think I want to stay here here in the world. But I'm going to need your courage. I'm going to need your spirit to really help me through the therapy I got to go through and to understand where my life is going. And so as I laid there and as the next day unfolded and stuff like that, I realized, you know what? I think I'm called to move into the second half of life now. So I was 57. I'm now 63. I went to my partners at the law firm and said, would you guys be okay if I slowly move towards counsel, where I'm just kind of on an as-needed basis? Because I really feel like I'm called to do the second half of life now. They're like, yeah, that's great. I went through the therapy at Mary Free Bed here in Grand Rapids and regained my speech. And really wrote this third book that Paulus Press published in March of this year called Finding Flow. And it really contains a lot of stories of my life, and not just what about my life, but about other wisdom teachers that have taught me things and universal truths that you can apply. And so, at 57, I moved in the second half of life, and now I'm, part-time lawyer, but full-time, spiritual director, retreats, workshops, and really teaching through workshops the whole concept of finding flow. So it's been an interesting life and a wonderful life, but a lot of surprises along the way, as most of our lives are. So that's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
And you're sticking to it. Well, that's a damn good one to stick to. Some of the stuff that you said, I really love the term stroke of luck. I mean, so many people that I, either I research or speak with or have the privilege of working alongside, we have those strokes of luck, things that happen that are at the time are painful, they're negative. We see them as a disaster or a calamity, and then they become our impetus to something greater in life. I just listened to a podcast with a gentleman by the name of Colin O'Brady on there as a guest, and I'm trying to get him as a guest on the Bamboo Lab podcast here. When he was, I think, 22, he was in, I think, Thailand, and he was on spring break, and he was jumping rope with a jump rope that was on fire, soaked in gasoline, and he ended up, it wrapped around him and it burned his body. pretty much,
Wow.
where he was told, and here he is in Thailand. It was a horrible hospital service. It was his mom was down there with him, and the doctor said, you probably are never going to walk again. Well,
Wow.
18 months later, he did a triathlon for his first one. Now he has climbed K2. He's climbed Mount Everest a couple of times. He is the first and only person to ever row a boat across the Drake Passage, which is the most treacherous water in the world. And
Wow.
he just became the first only man to pull a 350-pound sled from one end of Antarctica to the other. He did it in 54 days.
Oh my God!
I mean, this guy's amazing, and the host asked him, just like, with you, with that term stroke of luck. He said, "Do you wish that you wouldn't have that wouldn't have happened to you when you were 22 with the burns?" And he said, "I would wish nobody that pain, but I became the man I am because of it." And I just think that's so powerful.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think what I experienced in my own life is, I had this intellectual understanding about God, was raised. But I think as I moved into the second half of life, with the spiritual direction, and here at Dominican Center in Grand Rapids, the sisters and the teachers really said, but we move into another phase of as we become experiential. We have a relationship with God. So we begin to move from just that God in a box intellectual foundation, which is good, but we begin to see how is God unfolding in our lives? And we begin to see and communicate with the divine source of our being that helps us see things, not from that intellectual standpoint of, like that guy, and poor me, poor me, poor me. You don't see it that way. You see, there's an opportunity, through our wounds, we are healed. So, the stroke for me, really allowed me to apply. There's a concept I learned from Richard Rohr. I went to the Living School for 3 years, and I write about it in the book. This concept of order, disorder, and reorder. And, our lives follow this pattern. And having learned that theory, I was able to apply it to the stroke. So, in our lives, there's order, going along, doing things okay, life's going good. Then disorder hits. It could be something major, like this guy with a rope, burning him, my stroke, or it could be a divorce, or, an addiction, or it could be something just small that happens to us. We get depressed, or just life doesn't feel good. And so we recognize, okay, now I'm in disorder. And most of us want to go back to the old way, and we don't like change. But if we recognize in disorder, there's an invitation to push gently against it. What's the invitation to get to the reorder, the other side of that? And so I was literally able to take that concept that I learned through the Living School and apply it to the stroke of, okay, this is disorder. My brain isn't working real good with speech and da-da-da. How am I being invited to reorder? And I saw that as an opportunity that God nudging me to move to the second half of life. So we can apply that order, disorder, and reorder to any part of our lives. Even if it's like, all of a sudden we're going along and we just got the blues. Well, okay, I'm in disorder. What do I need to change to push through it? Maybe I need to read a book, or, spend some time with a good spiritual friend or a mentor. So that order, disorder, reorder becomes a universal truth, I think, that we can apply to our lives so that we can grow through it, basically. And it's how we grow, I think, yeah.
What's funny, Brian? When the last time you and I had it was coffee or lunch or breakfast in Grand Rapids, you said that to me, and I wrote that down. And for the past couple of years, I was thinking, what was it that Brian said that day? Because it made so much sense. And of course, I put it in a journal, and I go through so many journals that it's in one of them on the bookshelf. But so I wrote that down: order, disorder, reorder. And I think that's so powerful. And the idea is when you're in that disorder, whatever it is, it could be a financial health. You just be in a bad mood for a little bit, or it could be going through a family issue, is to push gently against that disorder so that you can reorder your life.
Exactly. Yeah. What can I do a little different to push? It's really an invitation to grow. It really is. And rather than, getting stuck in the problem, if we focus on the problem increase. We focus on the solution, we move into that reorder. So what are the things that I can do to move beyond the disorder? How am I being invited to grow? How is my life becoming my teacher, literally? So, yeah. I
also like what you said about the tapestry. The front of it looks so pristine and perfect, but when you turn it around, it's all these threads sticking out, and those threads are what hold it together.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
there's so many ways you can apply that, and look at life as a good metaphor for life. And I think that's really powerful.
Yeah.
So I haven't seen you in a couple of years, and I haven't seen you since it was pre-COVID. So over the past couple of years, Brian, what has been your greatest learning?
Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Hello.
Hi.
Wow, I can feel the energy already.
So in this episode, I want to bring things back to my roots a little, and I'd like to talk about how to bring that big city feel marketing vibe to a small town.
I just have to say that small town businesses have equal rights up their game.
Hey, speaking of business, I'd like you to talk about what's involved financially when selling a business.
Yes. Hey, I do have a serious question though. Why do you always tell me what I'm going to be talking about?
It's because I'm the good-looking one.
Did you even hear what I said?
Of course. Speaking of which, we're also going to talk about good communication and how to be a good listener.
I think one of us might need that.
Sorry, what? It's called Taming the Hustle.
Or something of the sorts.
Find us where you find your podcasts.
My greatest learning?
Yes.
Yeah. For me, it's really been finding flow. I mean, literally, the two books I wrote and self-published, I kind of knew what I wanted to write. I wrote Pillars of Steel, How Real Men Draw Strength from Each Other, about how spiritual friendships are important for men. I wrote another book called Life's Toolbox, kind of just a simple field guide to different spiritual practices. But when I started finding flow, actually, I resisted even writing it. And a buddy of mine, a spiritual direction client of mine, introduced me to a guy that had left the publishing world and started becoming a consultant. And he said, the book is going to write itself for you. I don't want you to walk in here with a preconceived notion. There was 10 of us that took his course. And he introduced, the biggest thing that I learned from him was something called the upper limit. He had us read a book that says, it was by Gay Hendricks, called Our Genius Self, but I think it's called Our Genius Self, but it's by Gay Hendricks. It's not a spiritual book. It's more of a psychological book. And what he says is when we're in our lives, there's a certain amount of order. We're used to doing things. Like I was really happy being a lawyer for the most part. But when we all of a sudden move out of our comfort zone, we bump into what he calls an upper limit. And most of us will go backwards. Oh, I'm scared. I'm fearful, da-da-da. And what Gay taught us, and Chad, the consultant from the writing world that helped me write the book, he said, if you can name it as your upper limit, then you're just being invited to push through it. You've hit the glass ceiling, and it's time to push through the ceiling, basically. And so writing Finding Flow was like that. I was like, I don't know what I'm going to write, and I'm frustrated, and da-da-da. And Chad and I, my publisher that I was working with at that time, the editor guy, I was just sharing with him this story. He said, well, what's your first memory, as a kid? And I write about it in the book. And I said, I remember as a little kid, I loved to take a stick, as probably in kindergarten. And when it rained, you know how in the city, the gutters fill up with water. And if there's leaves, it's kind of all plugged up and it goes into the street. And I love to jump out into the neighborhood and take a stick and unplug the leaves. And Chad goes, that's it. That's your book. I'm like, what? It's Finding Flow. And and he helped me develop it in the 4 themes that are in the book that we'll talk about. But it was like by him telling me, you know what? The fear of writing this book, the fear of anything when we move out of our comfort zone is natural. It's that disorder in a sense. It's our upper limit. And if we could just name it as our upper limit and push through it, okay, this is just fear because I'm out of my comfort zone. Then we can move to the next phase of growth. Gay Hendricks calls it our genius zone that we move into as we move, beyond the comfort zone and push through it to the other side. So, yeah, the upper limit was kind of in the last couple of years. I recognize when I bump up against it, and rather than going back and retrenching, is okay, how am I being invited to grow through this? So that was really powerful.
That's what I love. As a coincidence, maybe not, but Dr. Gay Hendricks was a guest on the Bamboo Lab podcast in episode number 36 back in August. So And all you listeners out there who haven't listened to that podcast, please go back and listen to it from August 8th, I believe it was, of this year. And he talked extensively about the upper limit problems and the zone of genius and how powerful those are. And I read his book maybe 2 years ago, maybe year and a half, 2 years ago, and it changed my life. And I've read it a couple of times. I've listened to the audio version a couple of times. So I think what I'm going to do is include a link to that book along with your books in the body of the podcast today. So that's great stuff, man. I love that order, disorder, reorder. That's so simple.
Yeah.
It's so damn simple, but it makes so much sense. It's an invitation to grow.
Yeah. I just finished a workshop on finding flow at a men's recovery center here in Grand Rapids, where the guys are in for 4 months through a recovery and an in-house program. And so I taught finding flow, and it was so cool. The last class was yesterday, and one of the guys, I'll call him Tom to keep his anonymity, he goes, I applied this order-disorder-reorder to my life just this week. I'm like, wow, what happened, Tom? And he said, I was the house manager for our group, and they came in and they said, we're going to replace you with someone else. Not because he did anything wrong, but they just were going to give another. And he said, I fell apart. I was angry. I was frustrated. I literally my old self would have gone back and drink. Yeah, I would have left the program to drink. And he said, what I did was I applied the Finding Flow Order-Disorder-ReOrder. I went into quiet time, which is one of the important pillars of the Finding Flow lifestyle practices that I talk about in the book and the workshop. So I spent more time in the quiet time. I reached out to a couple of other mentors. So community was this piece and they talked him through, Tom, this isn't a bad thing. You're getting freed of some responsibility. And he said, I realized, wow, now I can use some of my other gifts. So it was so cool to see him actually apply it to the order-disorder-reorder. It gave him a container to be able to understand himself and how he's being invited to grow. So it's so cool when you watch it and work in people. Yeah. Like you said, it really spoke to you when you and I talked about it years ago. Obviously, it stuck. Yeah.
When you said quiet time a few minutes ago, that kind of stuck with me a little bit too. And I think one of the things that I need in my life is unplugging from social media, unplugging from my phone. And I'm not going to commit this fully, but I'm 95% sure that I'm going to be committing this weekend to a process called the 12-hour walk, where you leave your house, you have your phone with you in case there's an emergency that you need to call, but you turn it off and you literally walk for 12 hours. Wow. And you have no earbuds in, no podcasts, no music, nothing. Now, you can walk a total of a mile during those 12 hours. You can stop and rest. The idea is to be outside by yourself for 12 hours, completely unplugged. Apparently, the process is life-changing. It completely resets your program. Because think about it. Human beings, we're not designed to be this plugged in. We're not designed to be this lackadaisical and sitting around all day and having so much information thrown at us that we're just not.
No, exactly. Yeah. And society, teaches us more social media, more news. And one of the things as I wrote Finding Flow, I reflected back when I was in the spiritual direction program at Dominican Center. Sister Nancy, who was our teacher, said, I want you to write a rule of life, a mission statement. And we were studying St. Benedict, Mother Teresa, the Dalai Lama, Thomas, all these wonderful spiritual giants. And she said, I just want you to take what you're learning and create a rule of life for yourself, a mission statement. And what I came up with, I looked at that each one of those people we were studying and the great spiritual teachers and really not just spiritual teachers, but people that we say are really people we look up to who have integrity. I came up with this concept. I call it QSCS. So it's 4 lifestyle practices. The first is quiet time that each one of us needs, as exactly like you said, Brian, on a daily basis, unplug for 15, 20 minutes, whatever it is. If it's meditating, if it's doing yoga, if it's walking in nature, but just 25 years ago, I was at a retreat, and it's Brian Casey, who actually was a retired lawyer, also was teaching the retreat, and I just felt something stirring within me. And so I met with him privately. I said, Brian, something's going on here. And he says, well, do you pray? I'm like, oh yeah, I say the rosary sometimes. We say prayers before me. I said, that's good. That's, ritual prayer is very good. He says, do you ever stop to listen to yourself and the divine God, however you understand? I was like, wow, I really don't do that. And so what he told me to do, and that's this quiet time that I talk about as one of the pillars of finding flow. He said, I want you to set your alarm clock tonight when you go to bed a half an hour early, and find a nice place in your house that's your quiet time space. Get a candle. When you get up in the morning, at half hour early, get your coffee, go to the restroom, let your dog out, and then sit, light a candle and sit for 20 minutes. And so I want you to do that for 10 days. You may resist it. Your monkey mind's going to go all over the place, and that's okay. You can use like your breath to just recenter yourself as you. And he said, you will find after 7 to 10 days, it is the most life-giving part of your day. What you're doing is creating that open space, that heart space, to really listen to your own inner self and also to God as you understand him. And I tell you that, I now spend about an hour and a half every morning in my quiet time. So that's the one piece. And it really is, if you look at Jesus, for example, in Scripture, the disciples get up in the morning. Where's Jesus? Oh, he's over there on the hillside. What's he doing? Oh, he's talking to his dad. And I call it having coffee with the Creator, basically. So that's one component, is that quiet time. The other, the S of the QSCS, is spiritual reading. Reading the books of someone just a little further than us on the spiritual journey, and gaining wisdom from what people are writing about. So spiritual reading could be scripture too, certainly, is another piece. Listening to podcasts would also be part of spiritual reading, because you're gaining wisdom from people that and their life experiences. And then the third component is the C, is community. Surrounding ourselves with, in the movie The Faulkners, a circle of trust. Who are the people that we lean into that nudge us to grow? Brian, you've been in my life. You've been someone that helped me in my law firm grow. So you were and continue to be part of my community in many ways. But a spiritual director, a spiritual friend. You had Ben Gillis on a couple of weeks ago, and Ben's been a great friend of mine. I just had dinner with him last night. He's one of my spiritual friends that we help each other, nudge each other to grow. So who's in your circle of trust that can help you grow? And also in that community box, sometimes that was a hard part for me, is who are the toxic people that I'm still going to love them, but I'm going to move them outside of my inner circle of trust, because they're really not helping me grow. They're actually, pushing me into the negative zone. So we also have to look at who should we lovingly move out of our circle of trust. And the last piece is spiritual gifts, taking a spiritual gifts inventory to discern what are my gifts and how am I invited in this season of my life to use those. So that's kind of the four lifestyle practices, a field guide of quiet time, spiritual reading, community, and spiritual reading. So, and on my website under the free resources, there's what I like to do is, some of this stuff is so theoretical. You got to make it practical. My wife often says, well, how do you apply this to your life? So, for example, on my website, under the free resources, there's a spiritual gifts inventory that people can download and take. There's a who's in your circle of trust exercise that you could do. And then there's different ways about things that you might do during your quiet time. So, so those are the four kind of quadrants or lifestyle practices, the QSCS of finding divine flow, as I call it. So,
I love that. I didn't get the second one until you said it again. So I got quiet time, spiritual reading, community, and spiritual gifts.
Yeah, exactly. Yep.
Perfect.
Quiet time, spiritual reading, community, and spiritual gifts. Correct.
I'm glad you gave a little shout out to Dr. Ben Gillis too. He was a guest on the podcast episode number 42 a few weeks ago. So hello, Ben. Yeah. All right. So you've had obviously a lot of stuff happen in your life. Your father passing away when you were 16. That's a tough age to lose a parent.
Yeah.
Then having the stroke of luck at age 57, you said, Brian?
57, right? Yep.
So taking all that and all the great things you've done, this question is, what is the most difficult thing you've gone through? And when you went through that, how did you get through it?
Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Hey, it's Mary Wagstaff, holistic alcohol coach and host of the podcast, Stop Drinking and Start Living. If you are finally ready to get alcohol out of your way, you have got to come check out my proven 5 shifts method to get a new perspective on the old habit of drinking. You can subscribe to Stop Drinking and Start Living wherever you are listening to this podcast right now.
Yeah, that's a good question. And it kind of draws up some tears, inside in a good way. Really, growing up without a father, at age 16, I really went through, when my dad died, he was kind of the John Wayne style of man. He didn't talk about his emotions. Just everyone adored him, as I did. In one of the books I wrote about him, I didn't publish it, but it was called To Ease the Pain. And I called him, when I wrote the book, I called him the Giant, because even when he got cancer, I just remember I'd helped my mom. I was the only kid still at home. I helped my mom, walk dad to the bathroom. And he never talked about that he knew he was dying of cancer. And so I saw him as like, he's the person I want to be. I thought he was perfect, and I didn't really have another male role model in my life. My brother was off and doing his own thing, and good buddy and stuff like that. But I didn't have anybody that I leaned into. And looking backwards, what I realized is God became my father. I really leaned into God and slowly, God, again, not intentionally, but how God does that. He slowly draws us into that deeper relationship. So really, I think the way I moved through it was I saw God as my Heavenly Father, and I leaned into him. One of my spiritual friends I met 12 years ago, I write about it in the book, Ralph, he's just a good buddy. And when we first met at a conference 12 years ago, he said, "Hey, let's go have a beer after the conference." And we had having a beer. He lived in Chicago. I lived in Grand Rapids, and we were in Chicago. And he goes, "You talk about God a lot." And I said, "Well, he's kind of a big deal." He says, "Well, why is that?" I says, "Because I really didn't have anybody else to lean into." So I think, again, how a net could have been seen as a negative thing, but certainly, losing my dad was tough. But it actually helped me become the man that I am, by leaning into God for strength, for wisdom. So that's I think it just increased my relationship with God, leaning into him. And not just an intellectual way, but more and more through Dominican Center, helping me experience, particularly through the quiet time, experiencing. I really, really in the quiet time, sometimes me and God kind of have this great conversation, not audible. I write about that, like Verizon says, in the book I write about it, can you hear me now? And, there is a voice that God has. And I think he speaks to each one of us in unique ways. And when we take the time to unplug, as you say, Brian, and really discern the voice of love, it begins to be a guiding principle. And that's kind of how I think I slowly evolved over these 63 years, that this relationship with the God of love.
That's so, obviously that's a part of why we've become such good friends over the years, I think, too, is we share that experience. My father passed away when I was 4.5 years old. And and really, Brian, I've noticed it more so in the last few years, how much that impact that had on my life, not having a father figure, and also not even seeing how relationships work. I didn't get to watch a mother-father, parent relationship work, and having to relearn all those things or teach myself all those things. But, several years ago, I was sitting down with I forget the name of the minister from our church, Gene DeYoung. Great guy. Okay. I really, really liked Gene a lot. And we were in a little circle. We were talking, it was myself and I think maybe a friend of mine, or I forget, sitting and talking to 2 new members of the church. And we were kind of sporadically going anyway, but he asked, "Hey, this young couple's moving to Grand Rapids. You're looking for a church. Would you mind sitting down around a table with us and just so you can experience what your journey has been the last few months?" And I said, "No." And Gene said something at that moment that connected with me, that changed the way I view my relationship with God. And he said, And I asked him, I said, I have a difficult time with prayer. I said, it seems so structured and it seems so like almost like I'm repeating the same thing. He said, because you're not talking to God, you're praying. And he said, you if you want to have a relationship, you need to talk too. You need to have, and I said, but it just seems odd. So he said, here's what I would suggest. You don't have to call him God. You can call him Papa, you can call him Pops, you can call him Dad. And when he said the word Dad, I'm like, bingo. And so from that moment on, and I do this throughout the day, and I'll, if I do something stupid, I'll say, sorry about that, Dad. And when I do prayer and meditate, that's what I use the term Dad. And I think that's because I never had that. You and I didn't have that in our formal years, have that person we could call Dad. And I think that was a connection that just that one sentence, that one suggestion he made changed the way I have my relationship with God. Or in this case, Dad. So
exactly. And the cool thing, Brian, is that you were open to hear that. It really, I call those God nudges. When things like that happen, somebody says a piece of wisdom like that you really integrate. You were open to say, oh wow, and the image of God doesn't need to be this stark, overly religious thing. It's a relationship, as you said, Dad. One of the things I write about in the Fighting Flow book is at the beginning of it is. A very important question is who is God to you? What word, phrase, metaphor, who is God to you? And then the second question is, who am I when God looks at me? How does God view me? If he's the God of love, it's going to be something positive, beloved, child of God, the divine energy of God, whatever. But those two questions that are so simple, like, who is God to me? And like you say, it's unique and personal for each one of us. And when we find the terms, the metaphors that work for us, all of a sudden the relationship deepens. My wife, we've been married 39 years. Her name is Denise. I'm Brian. What do I call her though? Sweetheart, sweetie. She calls me Bri. She calls me honey at times. I mean, they're terms of endearment that probably, nobody would understand the depth of those terms. How deeply they go into our relationship. But, as we deepen the relationship, we do find these different terms of endearment. And good for you found the term Dad,
Yeah. Cool. And actually, when I started doing it, it felt really odd to say that. Because I mean, at the time I was probably, 45, and I'd gone for the past 41 years of my life never using the term Dad to anyone. I've had my children, of course. I'm Dad, but I've never said those words in many, many years. Brian, as you change the direction, as you say, your second half of life, right now, what is a win for you? What do you call a triumph or a victory?
Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Change can be uncomfortable, stressful, even downright frightening. But sometimes people push through the fear and face change head on. This podcast is about those people. Change agents who saw something no one else could see, believed in something others dismissed, and changed things for the better. I'm June Love Young, CEO of Zoom Communication. Welcome to A Change Mindset, a podcast by Zoom Communications.
Yeah. The most exciting thing for me, and I'll use the example of Tom yesterday, when somebody connects with their experience of God and it changes them, that to me just fills me with joy. When something I've written or even not necessarily something I do, but when somebody has that experience of the relationship, like you talked, with Dad, when you see them growing in their deepening their relationship with the divine, however you want to call, God, the divine, Papa, Dad, whatever. I just get this tingling inside of me when people connect with God. Yeah. And I tease in some of the workshops I do. I say, I did one at Catholic Information Center, and we had just a great hour and a half talking about the Finding Flow and the 4 quadrants of the lifestyle practices. And I mean, the people really went deep. We had great conversations and people on the spiritual path. And I said, thank you, everyone, for being here, because you helped me know that I'm not nuts. That there is this God that other people are seeking like I am. So I'm not crazy. So just watching other people, experience in their own way this divine presence, whatever it is that we can never fully name, but we know that we know that we know is a part of that divine relationship, human and divine relationship. So yeah, I love it when somebody connects with the Spirit of God within them.
Brian, as quite obviously, because we have listeners from around the world, many of the Bamboo Pack members may not be Christian. They may be atheist or agnostic. They may practice another form of religion. How can they use this message that you deliver about connecting with God, connecting with the divine, if they intellectually or emotionally just can't get through? They have another God or divinity that they follow, or they don't believe at all, or they're uncertain. Without getting preachy.
Yeah, that's one of the things. The term I would use is universal truths. That there are certain universal truths, whatever pathway you're on, Buddha, Christian, whatever it is, whatever pathway, there are universal truths. And I think we get so stuck in the semantics of, one of the conversations that I'm going to have next year with a gentleman from Catholic Information Center, exactly that topic of how can we communicate with each other in all these different faith traditions, or sometimes no faith tradition. AA teaches, God as you understand God, and just find that. So I think that if we point to the universal truths, they all become helpful to us on whatever pathway. One of the teachers I just loved, and every year I go down to Gethsemane for a week-long retreat with Ralph, my buddy. It's a silent retreat with the Trappist monks. And Thomas Merton, who's a great, he died in 1968, I think, but he really brought that contemplative tradition to the Western world. And what I loved and learned from Merton, not that I ever met him, but through his readings and writings, he would meet with the Dalai Lama. He would meet with, people from all faith traditions, not to change them and say, oh, you need to come down this Christian road, but to learn from them. And the Dalai Lama, after Merton died, there's a talk that he did that said, Thomas Merton is my friend because we both learned universal truths from each other. And so I think I really do believe that's where we're moving. There's a lot of chaos in the world, obviously. But I think some of the barriers are coming down. Can we stop trying to convince each other that my way is the right way? Can we just focus on the universal truths that we can learn from each other? Things like order, disorder, reorder. That can be applied to any pathway, basically. Things like, from the upper limit, push through the upper limit. I mean, if you want to put that in the terms of St. Ignatius, pushing through an upper limit, St. Ignatius teaches from a Christian perspective, it means when you're in desolation, when you're not happy, not experiencing joy, push gently against it, into consolation. So the concepts can be used, I think, as universal truths, whatever pathway you're on. And if we can stop fighting over the word, the language, and say, what are we really pointing to, in terms of a piece of wisdom, then all of our pathways are relevant. It's just whatever works for you. Does that make sense?
It makes a lot of sense. I think that's probably one of the more profound ways I've heard that described and explained, because I think that can we just each stop trying to convince every other person that my way is the only way, and just accept the universal truths.
Yeah, you got to come to my country club. I got the right country club here. It's like, no, stop it. We can learn from each other.
I love that. Yeah. Another question. You and I are going to jump into a time machine right now. We're going to go back in the past. We're going to go back 43 years when you were a 20-year-old young man, and you're sitting down and you were saying, young Brian, here's my recipe for success in life. What would you say to your 20-year-old self?
Now or when I was 20?
You're 63, but you're talking to your 20-year-old self.
I would say discover finding flow. I would say I wish at 20 years old I knew about quiet time. I wish my faith tradition would have taught me more about spending that time listening, talking to Papa, Dad, however we experience. So I wish I knew these 4 lifestyle practices way back then: spiritual reading, Take time to read books that inspire you. It doesn't always have to be spiritual either. Gay Hendricks' book is not necessarily a spiritual book. It's a psychological book. So, read books that help you grow, or listen to podcasts, surround yourself with a community of people. When I stumbled into spiritual direction, I write about it in the book. It was a funky thing. I didn't expect. I didn't know what spiritual direction was, but had I known back then that, oh, wow, the spiritual director is someone that helps me reflect on the movement of the divine spirit of my life. And the last thing is, I wish I would have known what my spiritual gifts were at a younger age. So I call that divine flow, finding divine flow, because there's when I started my research for finding flow, there's a lot of psychological books. There's a Japanese guy whose name I can never pronounce. He wrote a book on flow. And it's, when you're an athlete or an artist and, you're in that flow, we talk about you're in the zone. And that's really cool. That's really good. But what I found was it was mind and body and emotion maybe, but nobody was talking about spirit. And so what Finding Flow, my book, is really finding divine flow. How do we add the spiritual component? And those are the 4 quadrants for me. The quiet time, spiritual reading, community, and spiritual gifts. I wish I would have known that back then. But you know what? I probably wasn't ready at age 20. I was too busy having fun at Aquinas College and, doing what we do in college sometimes. So, I probably wouldn't have been ready for it then. So, but I wish I would have known it in some ways. Does that make sense?
It makes a lot of sense. That's wonderful. What's next for you? Any more books on the horizon, or what's your next phase in this as you're going into the second half of your life now? You're in it. What's next?
Yeah. So, it's funny because people ask, well, you're going to write another book. And, I really feel like I'm being called to take the Finding Flow workshop on the road. I'm just looking for opportunities to really, either in an hour and a half or a whole weekend or, whatever format works. I really feel like there's some universal truths that people can take from these 4 lifestyle practices and apply them in their own way to their lives. So, yeah, I just really feel called to continue to do workshops around the Finding Flow concept, both in different communities. I've been doing a lot in West Michigan. I would love to branch out. I did one actually when COVID hit. We were going to do it in person in Vermont, but we did through Zoom basically because of COVID. But I'd like to continue to spread the message. I feel that's my calling right now, is to teach those 4 lifestyle practices to people so they can integrate it into their lives.
And you have another one coming up on October 11th?
Yep. Yeah. Okay. So the Catholic Information Center, we did last month, we did kind of the whole Finding Flow concept. So in an hour and a half, we really experience these 4 practices. And what we're going to do October 11th, both on Zoom at Catholic Information Center and in person, is we're going to talk about the second half of life. How can the spiritual gifts inventory help people discern where am I being called in the second half of life? So it's really taking that 4th quadrant, that 4th lifestyle practice, and applying it and inviting people to take what I'm doing is inviting people to take the inventory ahead of time. And then the workshop will be about what you learn about yourself? What are your gifts? Any surprises? How are you currently using them? How would you like to use them in the other half of life? Because what I think those spiritual gifts are, they become like an inner compass. Like, wow, when I'm using these gifts, I come alive. Like, Brian, if you take the spiritual gifts inventory, I got to believe teacher and encourager is way up there on your top 5 gifts. And I imagine you just come alive when you're doing these podcasts and talking to people. And so that's what finding those gifts are about, is there's this giving and receiving. So yeah, the October 11th is really, how do we use the spiritual gifts inventory as an inner compass to move, really into the second half of life.
Do you still have room for that workshop for new people to come?
Definitely. Yeah. Yep. Exactly. Yeah. So there's I think I sent you the link. You can put that on. You can go to Catholic Information Center here in Grand Rapids. Under their calendar, they have a link to sign up for it. And like I said, it can be either via Zoom, so people don't have to be in Grand Rapids. That's the beauty of Zoom. Or if you're in Grand Rapids, the West Michigan area, you can actually do it in person. So it will be presented live and in person and on Zoom.
We're going to include all the links in the body of this podcast, and I'm going to recommend everybody get out there and click these links. Get this book, Finding Flow, from Brian. I'm going through it now, and it's eye opening. It really, truly is. You can get it on Amazon. That's where I got my copy. He's got a YouTube page, Facebook page. He's got his website, brianplachta.com. He's got information on this October 11th workshop. So that'll all be included here. So when you just scroll down, click on those links and check them out. Brian, is there anything, as we begin to wrap up, is there any question that I didn't ask you that you wish I would have, or do you have a final parting message for the Bamboo Pack members?
Yeah. So the last thing I would say is something one of my spiritual mentors back 25 years ago, Brian Casey, what he said to me, he said, Brian, take a baby step, but make it the biggest baby step you can take. And I think in the spiritual journey, we need to continue to take those baby steps, but make them big baby steps. When we went to school, we learned Math 101. We didn't just stay with Math 101. We took algebra, trigonometry. Everything we study, we're always advancing. And I think spirituality is the same thing. Listen for those God nudges and take a baby step. It could be signing up for the Simple Wisdom reflections that I write and send out every Monday. It could be, those free resources on my website, Jumpstart Your Meditation Practice. Lord, teach us how to pray, a smorgasbord of different practices you can apply to your life. Spiritual Gifts Inventory, who's in your circle of trust, those resources. And then I have a YouTube page where I do guided meditations that people can use. A lot of times it's hard to enter into that quiet time without a jump start. So I've got guided meditations that I have on. I've got a dozen or more of them on there. So yeah, take a baby step, but make it the biggest baby step in your spiritual life. It's really self-care that you can take.
Take a baby step, but make it the biggest baby step you can take. Mm-hmm. I love that.
Yeah.
I talk so often on here, and I talk to clients, and I'm a big fan of, that's obviously where the name Bamboo Lab came from. You and I spoke about this a couple of weeks ago when we were talking, where I believe you plant the seed and you nourish it, you fertilize it, and you take care of it, and you don't really see growth right away, but because you're doing all these little things that bamboo seed is just taking root underneath the earth, and it finally explodes. And that's so the idea of baby steps, Ed Milet has his book, The Power of One More. It's one more, just do one more of those little things, but make sure they're in the right direction. And like you said, make it the best or the biggest baby step you can make and you can take. So I love that.
Yeah. Yeah. And if there was one step I would suggest is the practice of quiet time. Find, like Brian Casey taught me 25 years ago, 15, 20 minutes every day where you just unplug, you go to a space where you're uninterrupted and you connect with your inner self, and however you understand the divine, God, whatever you want to call, this power that's bigger than us, you just take that 15 to 20 minutes every day for quiet time. I think that to me is, at least it was my biggest baby step way back then, and continues to be every morning, get myself out of bed and say, I'm going to spend that quiet time again. So, yeah.
Years ago, a friend of mine in college, Kevin Corhorn, he was actually a guest on one of the podcast episodes. He and I were sitting, we'd go down to the dams at Central Michigan University, and we would just talk, and we would have these, we both played rugby, and we were, partiers, and, we raised our share of hell at Central Michigan University over the 4 years. But we had these two 20-year-old men would go down to the dams, and we'd sit and talk. Sometimes we'd cry, we'd laugh. And he said one day, I remember this, he said, I think we're running so fast in life because we're afraid if we stop, our stench is going to catch up to us. And when you talk about quiet time, Brian, I think that's a big fear so many people have it. I'm sure I could be included in that because I struggle with meditation. I struggle with unplugging. I can struggle with quiet time. And I just wonder if I'm afraid of what I'm going to find when I get in my own head.
Yeah. I think you're right. I think there is a fear. It's an upper limit that we have to push through. I love the image of the Tasmanian devil. How he's, or even in Peanuts. There's who's the guy with the stink all around him. I think, we may, the beauty of it is we're going to find our shadow self in the quiet time, but we're also going to find our authentic self, and it's always deeper and deeper. There's the mystery of finding out who am I really? And so when we take that baby step, you're right, and unplug, it can be a little scary, but boy, it's to discover who you are, to get away from all the outer world distractions. And that's what I think. Some people think that it's this whole concept of contemplative, tradition, the quiet time, and that's why I call it quiet time. They think that it's like new age. But if you look at it, it's actually, we're in this busy world, we're rediscovering the need to go into the quiet. Our brains are 24/7. And I think what we're rediscovering is, wow, Jesus went to the quiet time. Thomas Merton went to the quiet time. Dalai Lama spends quiet time. Thich Nhat Hanh, the great spiritual leader. I mean, he taught, meditation as a pathway to inner peace. So I think what we're doing is rediscovering the chaos is driving us to the other side of how do we find these quiet time practices that, and one of the things that I find really helpful, one of the workshops I did, a guy said, well, where do I begin? And I find there's a website called praiseyougo.org. It's from the United Kingdom. It's, I think, a Jesuit. But they have the scripture reading for the day and then a little bit of music, and then they ask some questions. And so it's very contemplative. And then what I do is it's about 10 minutes long. I use that to jumpstart my practice. And then I sit for another 20 minutes and just see, from what they've said, the questions they raise, what rises up with me? Is there a word, a phrase? Yesterday, what rose up with me was, be gentle. like I would imagine you're like me, Brian, pretty high energy, and which is good. But I also need to develop this quieter side of myself. Can I be more gentle? And that rose up in my quiet time as just an invitation to, can I just slow down a little bit throughout the day when I'm talking to people? Can I just, be a little more gentle? and that's the beauty of the quiet time. Yeah, it rose up from sitting in the quiet time yesterday. I'm still working on it, though.
I do like what you said, 15 to 20 minutes a day. I know that I need that. And so I'm going to challenge you. Think about doing this 12-hour walk thing too.
Yeah.
You go out your front door and you just walk for 12 hours. You can stop and sit, but you just spend 12 hours alone, unplugged. As long as you're staying somewhat active and bring food, bring water, whatever you need. Like I said, I'm 95% committed.
Yeah.
Not 100% yet. I think it's a great idea.
What I try to do once a month is I literally try to get away from everything. We have a cottage, fortunately, that I can go to. Before when we had the cottage, I just go camping. But and I'm going next week for a week in a writing retreat, just myself and my buddy Ralph. And that'd be great to just for 12 hours just to walk and unplug. I love that idea. Thank you.
It's a challenge. It's actually there's a book written by this is the gentleman who was burned as a young man and scaled Mount Everest. He tells a really cool story. I'm going to share it here. And because he talks about listening, and he used the term intuition. And he was climbing Mount Everest, or I'm sorry, it was K2, and they were attempting to climb it, be the first party to ever climb it in the wintertime. And it's 100-mile-per-hour winds. It's 50 below zero. Nobody has ever scaled it in the wintertime. It's the most difficult mountain to climb in the world. It's the second highest, but it's the most difficult technically. And he got. It takes like 2 months to acclimate yourself. You have to go up and down to different base camps and to get your oxygen level, whatever, your body prepared for it. Anyway, they were a couple of days from reaching the summit. And the guy he was closest to, his partner, said, I got to go back. And he said he was hiking perfectly. Everything was going well. And he said, well, why? He goes, I have an intuition I'm going to die at the top of that mountain. And they had made a pack, this team had, there was, I think there were 7 of them total, all really close, friends through this process. And they had made a deal at sea level that if anybody says they have their intuition says to go back, there's no questioning. You just go back. Wow. And so he went back and they climbed for, a couple more days, or I don't know what it was. And they got 20 hours from the summit. And because the guy he was sharing the tent with was the one who went back, they were 10,000 feet. It was a sheer rock cliff, 10,000 feet, but they were on a little bank and a little cliff or a little plateau there. And he was in his tent and he heard some scuffling outside. And he's heard these guys, the other 5 guys say, "Where's the tent? I thought you packed it. I thought you packed it at at our last camp." Well, the other guys forgot their tent. So they all had to climb, 6 guys had to climb into a 3-person tent.
Oh, no.
And he said, I was climbing my best the whole time this gentleman was talking. I just said his name earlier. O'Brady, his last name is. And he said, I was climbing so well the last couple of days. I felt great. But all of a sudden, when we were all in there together, something told me, you're going to die at the top of that mountain.
Whoa.
And he said, I got on the satellite phone. I called my wife. And she said, honey, I trust you. I have faith in you. You will make the right decision. You made a commitment to yourself that if your intuition tells you to go back, you will go back. But I'll trust anything you do. So he got off the phone. He said, I sat there and talked about it. And I looked at the guys. I said, sorry. And he's the leader of this pack. He's broken so many world records of the climbs. And, you know, I mean, he pushed the 350-pound sled across the whole continent of Antarctica in 54 days. And he said, I'm going back. And they said, well, can we ask why? He said, intuition says I'm going to die at the top of that mountain. They said, we respect your decision. We'll miss you on the journey. We'll see you at base camp. And I think it was 3 days later. So the next morning at 5 a.m., they all got up and climbed. He went down to base camp. Within that 3-day time frame when they were supposed to meet him, all 5 of those other men died at the top of that mountain.
Oh my gosh.
He lost some of his best friends at the top of that mountain. And he said, so, you know, we talk about intuition. Maybe that's the divine talking to us. That's the universe. It's, you know, it's something telling us that you got to go back.
Yeah,
you know?
Exactly. And that's what we, in that quiet time and talking to others like he did, you know, we discern, you know, we learn, you know, there's a funky term, I would call it wisdom, you know, and we don't really use that word these days, but, you know, wisdom, intuition, whatever the term you want to use, there's 3 components of it. One is we gain wisdom from life experiences. You know, when you're a little kid, you touch the stove that was on and you burned your finger. Oh, I'm not going to do that anymore. Or you drink too much and end up in a 12-step program. Okay, I need to not drink as much. You know, so life experiences teach us. We gain wisdom from other people, you know, like he did, you know, talking to his wife and you know, his buddies. So there's that the intuition we gain from other people, from reading and you know, that thing. And then there's something that Saint Ignatius calls is infused knowledge. I call it light bulb knowledge. Like all of a sudden, you know that you know that you know. This is what I'm supposed to do, and you follow it. And that's, you know, that infused knowledge is the 3rd component of wisdom. And I think sounds like what you know, O'Brady tapped into, you know, is that infused light bulb knowledge, but also talking to others and his own life experience. So, wow, that's a powerful story. I hope your 12-hour walk, you're not climbing a mountain, Brian.
No, I don't climb mountains.
That's good.
I do hikes. I do. And
there you go.
The thing is, I'm afraid while I'm doing this, Brian, that I'm going to be walking for 12 hours and somebody's going to call the police on me. This guy's just wandering around town, you know? So,
yeah.
But I think I'll probably do it more in the woods. I'll figure I have to commit one thing, first of all, because there is a commitment process on the app. It's called the 12-hour walk. And you commit the date and then they track you and they give you encouragement. And, but then I have to find my location before I can even commit. I got to figure out where I'm going to walk for 12 hours. I just don't want to do circles around a neighborhood. So,
yeah. Well, let me go. Shoot me an email. Let me know how it goes.
Oh, I will. Yeah, for sure. I can't shoot you the email while I'm walking though.
Well, that's true. Yeah, you got to be unplugged afterwards.
Afterwards, yeah.
In the 13th hour.
In the 13th hours, I walk back in the front door. Right. Well, Brian, this has been a privilege, man. It's so great to connect with a friend. We've known each other for so many years, and it's so good to connect on a level like this. And you know, I think back when I first met you decades ago, a couple of 10, 15, 20 years ago. I never thought, you know, sitting in your law office that at one time in the future you'd be sitting here on the Bamboo Lab podcast talking about the latest book you wrote and the workshops you're doing. And, you know, as you enter into that second half of your life, I think it's just been an honor, and I'm so proud to call you a friend.
You too, Brian. Yeah. And to the listeners, you know, feel free to shoot me an email if you have questions. You know, reach out to me. I just want to help walk alongside other people, you know, so yeah, feel free, listeners, to shoot me an email or connect with me on my website. And I appreciate you, our listeners, listening, and Brian, you providing this platform for, you know, to bring leaders to the forefront of ways that we can inspire each other. So thank you. You inspire me.
Thank you very much. It means a lot to me, Brian. Mm-hmm. So Brian, we'll spend a few minutes after we stop the podcast here, but I'm going to wrap it up now and say again, thank you, man. This is an honor, and a Bamboo Pack. I'm sure you got a lot out of this. Please reach out to Brian. All the links will be included in the body of this podcast. Reach out to him, explore him a little bit, look at the workshops, buy his book. This is good stuff. And so many of us are lacking in these areas, especially the ideas of quiet time and spiritual, reading and community and finding our spiritual gifts. Those are so powerful. So reach out to him, please. In the meantime, everyone, have a great week. I appreciate all of you. The growth we've had is all due to two things. The amazing guests that are coming on here and sharing their wisdom and experiences and their challenges, and all of you amazing Bamboo Pack members who are continue to come back every week and subscribing and liking and sharing reviews and writing emails and heart letters to us and text messages and then sharing with other people. So please hit that like button if you haven't yet. Give us a rating or a review, and please share this podcast with 3 people you know. Send them out, text it to them, email it to them, or call them and say, hey, man, you got to see these guests, listen to these guests that Brian brings on the Bamboo Lab podcast. Appreciate all of you, everyone. Please get out there and sculpt your life this week. Take care.